On the cold evening of December 20th, 1968, two teenagers, 10-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen, went out on a first date in Benicia, California, a quiet town nestled in the North Bay region of the San Francisco Bay Area. Unaware that their innocent night would soon mark the beginning of one of America's most terrifying and unsolved crime sprees. After visiting a friend's house and stopping by a local restaurant, they eventually made their way to Lake Herman Road, a remote and somewhat isolated stretch known among young couples as the secluded Lover's Lane, where they parked David's Rambler station wagon on a gravel turnout near the entrance of a water pumping station. Sometime between 10:15 and 11 p.m., a second car pulled up beside them. What followed next happened quickly and with chilling precision. A man stepped out of the other vehicle, approached their car, and without uttering a word, fired a .22 caliber handgun at point-blank range, shooting David once in the head, killing him instantly, then turning his attention to Betty Lou, who tried to escape but was gunned down with 5 shots to the back as she fled. She collapsed and died approximately 28 feet from the car. When police arrived, there were no signs of robbery, no indications of sexual assault, and no shell casings left behind that could be tied to a specific suspect. The killings appeared clinical, almost execution style. Investigators had little to work with and no known motive, but the community was left shaken by the brutality of the crime. For months, there were no leads, no arrests, and no further incidents until July 4th, 1969, when the same horror returned. On Independence Day, 22-year-old Darlene Farron and 19-year-old Michael Mageau were parked in Darlene's brown Corvair at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. Just a few miles from the first murder site, around midnight, another vehicle pulled in behind them. At first, the driver did nothing and simply sat there, but moments later the car drove away, only to return minutes later. This time, the man stepped out, holding a flashlight and a 9mm Luger handgun. He walked up to the passenger side of the Corvair and shone the light into Michael's eyes, temporarily blinding him. Without saying anything, the man opened fire, shooting both occupants multiple times. Michael was hit in the jaw, neck, and shoulder, but survived. Darlene was shot several times and later died at the hospital. The shooter walked away briefly, then came back and fired more rounds into the bodies before vanishing into the night. Roughly 40 minutes later, at 12:40 a.m., the Vallejo Police Department received a phone call from a man claiming responsibility for the attack in the earlier Lake Herman Road murders. His voice was calm, controlled, and chillingly direct. Said, "I want to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you'll find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." The call was traced to a payphone at a gas station located just blocks from the police department, suggesting the killer had stayed nearby after the shooting, fully aware of how close he was to law enforcement. Despite this, no suspect was apprehended. And once again, the police found themselves without a name, a motive, or a lead. On August 1st, 1969, 3 separate letters arrived at 3 newspapers: the Vallejo Times-Herald, San Francisco Examiner, and the San Francisco Chronicle. Each letter contained nearly identical content, including confessions to the 2 double homicides and a warning that more killings would follow. Enclosed with each letter was 1/3 of a cipher made up of strange symbols, letters, and characters. The author demanded the ciphers be printed on the front pages of the respective newspapers, threatening that failure to do so would result in a weekend of random murders. Killer wrote, "If you do not print this cipher by the afternoon of Friday, 1st of August, I will cruise around all weekend, killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again until I end up with a dozen people over the weekend." The signature on each letter included a symbol, a circle with a cross through it, resembling a sniper's crosshair. It was the first appearance of what would become the Zodiac killer's calling card. All 3 newspapers published the ciphers, as requested, hoping to avoid further violence and assist in identification efforts. A few days later, on August 7th, the San Francisco Examiner received another letter, this time beginning with the chilling words, "Dear Editor, this is the Zodiac speaking. This was the first time the killer publicly identified himself using the name that would become legendary. That same week, a school teacher named Donald Hardin and his wife Betty claimed to have cracked the cipher when decoded the message. Read, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all to kill. Something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all the people I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife." The final line of symbols remained uncracked and was thought by some to contain the killer's real identity, but no one has ever definitively confirmed its meaning. The killer's tone, confidence, and calculated language indicated that he was not only proud of his actions, but saw himself as part of a grander, deranged philosophy. He showed no remorse, only the desire for recognition and control. Police reviewed the cipher and confirmed that while the spelling was flawed and the grammar erratic, the decoded message was authentic and consistent with the crimes. The Zodiac had made his entrance, and California was gripped by fear. Investigators now knew they were dealing with a serial killer who craved attention, thrived on mystery, and was willing to communicate directly with the public through the media. Despite the letter's threats and the increasing tension, there were no killings that weekend, but the damage had been done. The Zodiac killer had made himself a household name. The first known murders, the cryptic messages, the ciphers, and the phone call painted a portrait of a highly intelligent, manipulative, and violent individual who was just getting started. What the public didn't know was that his next attack would be even bolder and more terrifying, involving a costume, a knife, and a secluded lake in Napa County. The Zodiac was not just a killer, he was building a legend. On the afternoon of September 27, 1969, college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were relaxing by the shore of Lake Berryessa, a calm and scenic lake in Napa County, California, where they had driven for a peaceful getaway, unaware that their day would soon descend into one of the most horrifying encounters in American crime history. As they sat on a blanket spread beneath a tree, enjoying the warm afternoon, they noticed a man in the distance approaching them from across the hillside. At first he appeared to be a hiker, but as he drew closer, they saw he was wearing something strange, a black hooded executioner-style outfit that covered his entire head and shoulders, with a white circle and cross symbol on the chest, like a sniper's reticle. He had dark clothing, black gloves, and a belt with a large knife in a sheath. In one hand, he held a gun. When he reached them, he calmly told the couple that he was an escaped convict from a Montana prison who needed their car and money to get to Mexico. Brian, trying to remain composed, cooperated, and Cecilia followed his lead. The man instructed Cecilia to tie Brian up with plastic clothesline he had brought, and then he tied Cecilia as well. Then, without warning, he pulled out a long, double-edged knife and began stabbing them 10 times into Brian's back and 6 times into Cecilia's back and abdomen, leaving them bleeding on the ground. The man walked back to Brian's Volkswagen Carmen Ghia and, using a black marker, wrote on the passenger door, Vallejo, 122068.
The 4th of July, 69, September 27th, -6:30 by knife.
Listing his previous crimes, along with that day's attack, and then drawing his now infamous crosshair symbol below the writing. Around 7:40 p.m., a call came into the Napa County Sheriff's Office from a phone booth near Main Street. The caller's voice was calm and matter-of-fact, saying, "I want to report a murder, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of Park headquarters." They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. He then added, "I'm the one who did it." Police traced the call to a payphone outside a car wash in downtown Napa, just a few blocks from the sheriff's office. Boom. Print was lifted from the receiver, but it didn't match anyone in their system. Cecilia Shepard died 2 days later from her injuries, but Brian Hartnell survived and gave police a detailed description of the man's outfit. His voice and his behavior calm, methodical, without a hint of panic or rage. The fact that the attacker wore a custom-made costume, brought pre-cut bindings, and calmly walked away to make a call to police, showed a level of premeditation that chilled investigators. But it was only 2 weeks later that the Zodiac struck again this time. In the heart of San Francisco, on the night of October 11, 1969, 29-year-old Paul Stine, a cab driver, picked up a fare near Union Square. His trip ticket noted the destination as the upscale neighborhood of Presidio Heights. When they reached the intersection of Washington and Cherry Streets, the passenger suddenly shot Paul Stine in the head with a 9mm pistol, killing him instantly. He then leaned over the dead man's body and ripped a piece of his shirt, which he would later mail to police as proof. A 13-year-old boy and 2 friends witnessed the killer wiping down the cab before casually walking away. In an unfortunate miscommunication, the police dispatcher mistakenly informed responding officers to be on the lookout for a black male suspect. So when officers saw a white man walking away from the scene, they let him go. The killer escaped. 2 days later, the San Francisco Chronicle received another letter from the Zodiac. This time, it included a torn piece of Paul Stine's bloody shirt. In the letter, the Zodiac claimed responsibility for the murder and taunted police, mocking them for failing to catch him just blocks away from the crime scene. He even threatened to start shooting children from school buses, saying he would just shoot out the front tire and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. This threat sent waves of panic through the city, and school buses were suddenly escorted by police patrols. Zodiac had now proven that he was not confined to lovers' lanes or remote areas. He could strike in the heart of a busy city, in broad view, and get away. Around this time, he sent multiple letters to the press, often filled with cryptic messages, puzzles, taunts, and ramblings. He frequently included his crosshair symbol, and sometimes signed off with strange number codes indicating how many people he claimed to have killed so far. The Zodiac became obsessed with his public image, playing games with law enforcement and reporters. He sent ciphers he claimed would reveal his identity, though they often appeared as gibberish or were never solved. The public was gripped with fear and fascination. People were afraid to drive at night. Young couples avoided secluded spots. And every strange letter in the mail became a potential threat. The Zodiac took credit for more murders than could be confirmed. In one letter, he claimed responsibility for 37 killings, though only 5 have ever been definitively linked to him. His communication style was erratic, sometimes articulate, sometimes incoherent, and investigators debated whether the letters were written by one person or several. One thing was consistent: his need for control, his craving for attention, and his desire to be recognized as a force of fear. While police worked tirelessly to piece together clues from multiple jurisdictions, Vallejo, Napa, San Francisco, the Zodiac's identity remained a mystery. The few surviving witnesses gave varying descriptions, and composite sketches were released, but no definitive match was made. Suspects came and went, but none were ever conclusively linked. Meanwhile, the Zodiac continued to write, mocking police, daring them to catch him, and hinting that more violence was always just around the corner. He once wrote, "I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all." The sooner reinforcing his delusion that killing gave him a kind of divine purpose. Despite the massive media attention, public fear, and aggressive police investigation, the Zodiac remained one step ahead. He seemed to enjoy the fact that he could kill in different counties, use different weapons, change methods, and still avoid capture. His letters became darker, more unhinged, but always carried that same symbol, always the same cold tone, always the same signature: Zodiac. By late 1969, the fear in Northern California was reaching its peak. People double-checked their locks. News anchors reported every new letter like a bombshell. And police departments were overwhelmed by tips, hoaxes, and leads that went nowhere. The Zodiac had become more than a killer. He was now a symbol of something deeper. A phantom in the minds of Californians, a nameless predator who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. And still, he was not finished. With more letters, more threats, and more twisted puzzles yet to come, the story of the Zodiac was far from over. In the months following the murder of Paul Stine, the Zodiac killer continued to terrorize Northern California with a string of taunting letters. eerie threats, and cryptic puzzles that kept the public on edge and investigators frustrated as they scrambled to uncover the identity of a killer who seemed to take pleasure in their failure. And on November 8th, 1969, he sent the San Francisco Chronicle, a 340-character cipher that would become known as the Z340, which remained unsolved for more than 50 years and included his usual threats, his infamous symbol, and more chilling taunts. Though this time, he did not include any specific references to a new crime. The next day, on November 9th, he sent another letter boasting about having evaded capture after the Paul Stein murder and included further threats against children and more complaints about the media's coverage of his crimes. In this letter, he also issued a challenge to the police. School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning, shoot out the front tire, and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. That threat forced local authorities to implement emergency safety measures, including deploying armed escorts for school buses and increasing police patrols around schools, leaving families in a state of panic. As winter set in, the Zodiac's letters grew more erratic and more frequent. On December 20th, 1969, exactly 1 year after his first known murders, he sent a Christmas greeting card to famed lawyer Melvin Belli, whom he had previously tried to contact during a call to a local television show. In the card, the Zodiac wrote, "Please help me. I am drowning. I cannot remain in control much longer." This note included a swatch of Paul Stein's shirt as proof of authenticity and led many to speculate whether the killer was experiencing a psychological breakdown or attempting to manipulate the public into thinking he was unstable. Then, in 1970, the Zodiac's focus shifted again. On April 20th, he sent another letter, this time including a cipher labeled the 13-symbol cipher, which remains unsolved to this day. In that same letter he wrote, "My name is _ followed by the code, suggesting that his true identity could be hidden in the solution. But once again, it yielded no answers, and no one was able to match the symbols to any meaningful translation. He also began referencing popular culture and politics in his writings, including threats against celebrities and bizarre references to the movie The Mikado, a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, which he quoted several times in subsequent letters. Around this period, one of the most promising leads came from a letter dated June 26, 1970, in which the Zodiac claimed responsibility for the abduction of a woman named Kathleen Johns, who had experienced a terrifying ordeal on March 22, 1970. Kathleen was driving with her infant daughter near Modesto, California, when she was approached by a man in another car who flagged her down, telling her that her tire was loose. When she pulled over, he offered to help, but instead of fixing the tire, he loosened it further, and as she drove away, the tire came off completely. He returned moments later and offered her and her baby a ride to the nearest gas station. What followed was a horrifying 90-minute drive through the dark countryside, during which the man never spoke of his intentions, but made vague threats and refused to stop. Kathleen managed to escape by leaping from the moving car with her baby in her arms and hiding in a nearby field until a passing truck driver helped her. When she reported the incident to the police, she later identified her abductor as matching the composite sketch of the Zodiac, and days later her abandoned car was found burned. Though the Zodiac claimed responsibility in his letter, no definitive evidence ever confirmed that he was the man behind the incident, but it fed into his growing legend as a manipulator of fear and orchestrator of chaos. Another wave of confusion struck in July 1970, when the Zodiac sent a letter containing a map and instructions to find a hidden bomb, supposedly placed somewhere in the San Francisco Bay Area. The map was a section of Mount Diablo marked with a crosshair, and the Zodiac claimed that once a specific number was decoded and aligned with the map, it would reveal the bomb's location. The threat caused a stir, and bomb squads searched various locations. But no device was ever found, and the coordinates failed to lead to any evidence, leaving authorities uncertain whether the threat was real or simply another of his mind games. Despite these frustrations, police continued to receive tips, analyze the letters, and interrogate suspects, but none led to an arrest. Among the growing list of suspects, one name stood out: Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester and Vallejo resident who was known to have lived near several of the crime scenes. Allen was first interviewed in 1971 and again in later years. And although some circumstantial evidence connected him to the Zodiacs, such as his possession of Zodiac-like watches, his familiarity with ciphers, and a connection to the Mikado handwriting, experts, DNA tests, and fingerprints all failed to conclusively link him to the murders. He was never charged and maintained his innocence until his death in 1992. Meanwhile, the Zodiac's communications became increasingly sporadic and strange. One letter sent on October 27, 1970, included a Halloween card with a disturbing message. "Peekaboo, you are doomed." This was signed with his crosshair symbol and the number 13, implying his murder count. As his letters grew weirder and less coherent, some experts speculated that others might have started copying the Zodiac style, that the killer himself was deteriorating mentally. Nonetheless, investigators continued treating each new letter with urgency. In March 1971, Zodiac sent a letter postmarked from Los Angeles to the Los Angeles Times, which suggested he was expanding his reach beyond Northern California, though no murders in that area were ever definitively tied. To him, the letter, like the others, was filled with taunts and vague threats, but offered no concrete evidence of new crimes. By early 1971, the Zodiac's communication began to dwindle. Public fear started to subside, but police remained on high alert. The lack of physical evidence made the case extremely difficult to prosecute or even understand as the killer. Left behind no hair, no reliable fingerprints, no confirmed DNA, and very few solid witnesses. His methods changed often, different weapons, different locations, different times of day, making it nearly impossible to form a predictable pattern. And yet, the constant through line was always the same: a cold, calculated desire for attention, for fear, and for the game of control, whether by knife, gun, or manipulation. The Zodiac exerted power not just over his victims, but over the entire region, taunting the press, challenging law enforcement, terrifying citizens, all while avoiding capture. Although 5 murders have been officially confirmed as the work of the Zodiac, many researchers believe the true count could be much higher. And numerous unsolved homicides from that era continue to be examined for possible links. Despite dozens of books, documentaries, and films exploring his actions and theories about his identity, the Zodiac remained anonymous, his motives unclear, and his crimes unpunished. He had become not just a killer, but a mythoghost haunting the annals of American crime history, and with each new letter and each new cipher, he tightened his grip on the collective imagination of a nation still waiting for answers. After March 1971, the Zodiac killer's direct communications with the public became less frequent, but each new letter carried with it an ominous sense of return. And on January 29, 1974, after nearly 3 years of silence, he mailed a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle that began with a chilling message: "I saw and think. The Exorcist was the best satirical comedy I have ever seen," mocking the seriousness with which the public was treating evil, and again signing it with his signature crosshair symbol. This letter, known as the Exorcist letter, reignited fears that the Zodiac had returned and included a new symbol and the words "Me, 37, SFPD 20, implying that he had killed 37 people and that the police had still made no progress in catching him. The implication was staggering. Not only was the killer still alive, but he claimed to have murdered many more victims than previously known. And yet the authorities still had no concrete evidence, no arrests, and no clear path forward. The style of this letter raised debate. Was it really written by the same Zodiac? Or was it a hoax by someone mimicking his tone and symbolism? Law enforcement couldn't be sure, but they treated it seriously, especially because the letter arrived with no advance warning and bore hallmarks of the killer's past style: short, mocking phrases, his crosshair logo, and taunting tone. In the months that followed, several more letters trickled in, though each one was increasingly cryptic, less detailed, and sometimes just cards with minimal writing. One postcard received on May 8, 1974 simply read, "If I do not see this, note in your paper, I will do something nasty which you know I'm capable of doing." And it was signed with the Zodiac symbol. These brief threats lacked the theatrical flair of his earlier communications, leading some investigators to suspect a copycat might be at work. But the timing and content still led many to believe the original killer was still out there alive, watching and enjoying the media reaction he generated, even with the smallest message. Over the next several years, dozens of unsolved murders across California were re-examined to determine whether they could be connected to the Zodiac, including cases from the Bay Area, Sacramento, and even as far south as Riverside. One particular case that drew significant attention was the 1966 murder of Sherry Jo Bates, a college student in Riverside who was found brutally stabbed in an alley near her campus library. A strange typed letter was sent to the newspaper and police afterward, claiming responsibility in a similar mocking tone and referencing the victim's last moments. Though the case predated the known Zodiac murders, the style and details bore an eerie resemblance, and some investigators believe this may have been the Zodiac's earliest known crime. Others dismissed the connection due to differences in the killer's methods and a lack of physical evidence tying him to the scene. But the Riverside Police Department took the potential links seriously enough to share the files with the Zodiac Task Force. Still, the case remained cold. As the years passed and the Zodiac's activity faded, public interest remained strong, and amateur sleuths began poring over his ciphers and letters, hoping to crack the codes and find the truth that had eluded police for over a decade. One of the biggest breakthroughs came not from law enforcement, but from private citizens. In 2020, a team of amateur codebreakers from the US, Australia, and Belgium finally solved the Z340 cipher, the one sent to the Chronicle in 1969. The solution did not reveal his identity, but the decoded message read, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me, ... I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all the sooner." While it didn't help identify him, the decryption provided closure on one of the longest-standing puzzles in American criminal history and renewed interest in solving the rest of the case. Meanwhile, modern forensic techniques were being applied. Two previously collected evidence, and investigators re-examined fingerprints, DNA, and other clues using newer, more advanced technology. In particular, the advent of genetic genealogy, famously used to identify the Golden State Killer in 2018, raised hopes that the Zodiac case might one day be solved in similar fashion. However, the Zodiac's DNA evidence was sparse and degraded, and the partial profiles recovered from the back of stamps and envelopes were not sufficient for a positive match. Still, investigators remained hopeful that future breakthroughs could lead to a resolution. In 2021, a group of former law enforcement agents and investigative journalists, calling themselves the Casebreakers, claimed they had identified the Zodiac killer as Gary Francis Post, a deceased man with a history of violence and suspicious connections to Northern California. They cited facial scars matching the composite sketch, alleged hidden messages in the Zodiac ciphers using his name, and a trove of photographs from Post's home, but authorities were quick to respond that there was no conclusive evidence tying Post to the crimes. The FBI and local police stated the case was still open and active, and Post was never officially named as a suspect. The announcement, though controversial, reignited public debate and speculation, reminding everyone that the Zodiac case still loomed large in the American imagination. Through all of this, one aspect remained constant: the power the Zodiac held over the narrative. It's unlike most serial killers, who either crave secrecy or collapse under pressure. The Zodiac thrived in the spotlight, and his ability to manipulate the media and public perception became as much a part of his legacy as the killings themselves. His letters were performance pieces, his ciphers were taunts, and his threats were psychological warfare. He knew that by remaining unidentified, he would become something more than a man. He would become a myth, a symbol of fear and unsolved terror. The killer not only shaped his own image, but helped shape public understanding of serial killers in general, influencing films like Dirty Harry and Zodiac, books, documentaries, and entire subcultures of internet investigators dedicated to decoding his work. The lack of closure gave rise to countless theories. Some believe the Zodiac was a loner with military experience and deep psychological issues, while others were convinced it was someone close to the investigation, perhaps even law enforcement itself. Despite the passage of time, each new development, whether a solved cipher, or a newly released letter, or a potential suspect, kept the case alive. Police across Northern California continued to keep files open. Special units occasionally revisited evidence in hopes of a technological breakthrough. But so far, no arrest has been made, and the killer's true identity remains unknown. By the late 1970s, the Zodiac had seemingly disappeared. Whether he had died, been arrested for unrelated crimes, or simply chosen to stop, no one could say for sure. What is known is that the letters stopped, the killings stopped, least officially, and he faded from the front pages. But the fear he left behind lingered. For those who lived through it, the Zodiac era was a time of paranoia and unease. Couples were afraid to park in quiet areas. Parents kept their children close. Police, haunted by their inability to catch him, endured years of criticism and self-doubt. Even now, decades later, his name still sends a chill down the spine of anyone familiar with his story. His crimes weren't just physical, they were psychological, emotional, and deeply cultural. He challenged the systems meant to protect society, and for a time, he won. His name became synonymous with the unknown, with the fear that someone among us could commit horrors and vanish into the shadows. And with each passing year, the mystery only deepens. The question remains, was the Zodiac a single man who outwitted the entire justice system, or has he become something more, an enduring symbol of our fear of the unseen, the unsolved, and the unknowable? As the years turned into decades, the Zodiac killer's trail grew colder. But his legend only grew larger, kept alive through books, films, documentaries, and a never-ending stream of amateur investigations that refused to let the case go. Fascination was not just with the crimes themselves, but with the sheer audacity of the man who committed them, a killer who inserted himself into the public narrative, who mocked his pursuers, and who vanished without ever answering for what he had done. In the 1980s and 1990s, law enforcement agencies periodically revisited the case as new technologies became available, including computer databases for fingerprints and DNA. But no solid connections were made. The DNA collected from stamps and envelopes sent by the Zodiac was either too degraded or too partial to provide a definitive profile. And countless suspects were cleared through handwriting analysis or lack of evidence. As criminal profiling advanced, the Zodiac was often cited as a textbook example of a narcissistic, attention-seeking sociopath, someone who likely kept trophies, relived his crimes, and enjoyed feeling superior to everyone chasing him still. None of it brought the police any closer to a name. The case's jurisdictional complexity, spread across multiple counties, Vallejo, Napa, San Francisco, meant that evidence wasn't always shared efficiently in the early years, leading to gaps and overlaps that only further clouded the investigation. Over time, many of the original detectives retired or passed away, taking with them knowledge that was never fully preserved, and leaving behind stacks of unsolved case files and theories. In the early 2000s, the internet created a new generation of Zodiac investigators. Online forums, Reddit threads, and dedicated websites sprung up, filled with theories, cipher solutions, suspect lists, and wild speculation. Some focused on known suspects like Arthur Lee Allen, a man with a criminal record, odd behavior, and circumstantial links to the case, who had been extensively investigated in the 1970s. Others believed the Zodiac had military or cryptographic training, and some thought he may have been an intelligent sociopath who simply stopped killing and blended into society. New ciphers were attempted by amateur codebreakers, some offering what they believed were solutions, though none have been universally accepted beyond the confirmed 2020 Z340 decryption. That particular solution, while chilling, offered no name. And no new evidence, only a further reminder of how elusive the Zodiac truly was. And yet, he remained ever present in the culture. In 2007, David Fincher's critically acclaimed film Zodiac brought the case to a whole new audience, dramatizing the obsessive efforts of journalists and police who tried to piece together the killer's identity. The film sparked renewed public interest, especially among younger generations unfamiliar with the case. It led to another wave of theories and private investigations. But for all the media, all the speculation, the central question remained unanswered. Who was the Zodiac killer? In 2021, the Casebreakers team reignited headlines by naming Gary Francis Post as a potential suspect, citing photo analysis, alleged hidden messages, and witness testimony from people who claimed to know him. But official agencies, including the FBI and San Francisco Police Department, were quick to say that there was no conclusive evidence and that the case remained open. Many experts cautioned against jumping to conclusions based on circumstantial or speculative links. Over time, other suspects emerged and faded from public attention, including people identified through deathbed confessions, cryptic diaries, or odd coincidences. But in every case, the evidence fell short of providing closure. Law enforcement needed more than theories, they needed forensic proof, and that remained elusive. In the background, the Zodiac's confirmed victims and their families continued to live with the trauma. The names of David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, Michael Mageau, Brian Hartnell, Cecilia Shepard, and Paul Stein became more than just case notes. They were real people whose lives were either taken or forever changed by a killer who thrived on fear and attention. The survivors carried memories of terror that time could never erase, and for the families of the deceased, the lack of justice became its own enduring wound. Even now, new books and podcasts continue to revisit the case, each hoping to offer a fresh perspective or new evidence, but most ultimately end with the same conclusion: unsolved. What makes the Zodiac killer unique among serial killers is not just his ability to evade capture, but the way he maintained control over the story. He carefully crafted a public persona through his letters and symbols. He changed methods and locations to avoid patterns. He lied about his body count and possibly exaggerated his role in certain crimes. But he always stayed one step ahead. His ability to manipulate the press and terrify the public from the shadows made him not just a murderer, but a cultural phenomenon. Created an image so strong that even decades later, his symbol, the crosshair in a circle, remains instantly recognizable. Some believe the Zodiac may have died shortly after his last confirmed letter in 1974. Others think he simply moved on, perhaps starting a new life under a different identity, his killing urges satisfied or redirected. There are even theories suggesting he was institutionalized or arrested for unrelated crimes and lived out his life unknown behind bars. Whatever the truth is, he was never officially unmasked. The final twist in the story may never come. But perhaps that's part of what gives the Zodiac his enduring power: the mystery. In a world increasingly dominated by surveillance, DNA databases, and digital footprints, the idea that someone could commit multiple murders, taunt the entire country, and disappear without a trace is both terrifying and strangely compelling. He represents the limits of the system, a phantom that slipped through the cracks, and a reminder that even in a world of order and logic, chaos still lurks. Today, the Zodiac files remain active with the FBI and local agencies, though resources are limited. Periodically, advances in forensic science lead to retesting of old evidence, and hopes are raised again that one day, DNA will speak the truth. Until then, the Zodiac killer exists in a liminal space between history and myth, fact and fear, crime and legend. He was more than a killer. He was a manipulator, a performer, and a predator who thrived not just on death, but on the terror he left behind. As long as his name is spoken, as long as his ciphers are studied, and as long as justice remains unserved, the Zodiac's shadow will continue to stretch across the American landscape, silent, unsolved, and unforgettable.